Morning, everyone. Welcome to the second WISTech training, a guided tour of technology for people who are blind or have low vision. So excited to have our session today and to welcome Rachel and seeing all of your faces. Well, not actually seeing you, but just letting you know that this training is provided from WISTech, Wisconsin's State Assistive Technology Act program, and Department of Health Services. And a few pieces of housekeeping, just so that you are aware. Again, we are recording this session. It will be uploaded to the WISTech YouTube channel. Usually takes a week or two. And we do have closed captioning available. And at the bottom of your screen, you can click there to enable the closed captions. We also have sign language interpreters. And so you're welcome to go ahead and pin that video if you need. We will encourage you to use the chat for any questions. You can also use Q&A, but Rachel and I will be monitoring chat. So I really encourage you to interact and share your thoughts as this training proceeds. There will be CRC and CEU credits available for those that are interested. You will get a survey after the training. And if you complete that survey and answer a couple questions, then we will be able to issue those CRC and CEUs. This is the webinar platform, so that means that participants are muted and their cameras are off. And again, you can raise your hand if you do need to ask a question verbally. Otherwise, we are encouraging the use of chat. So we will go ahead and get going. And I'm excited to introduce Rachael Sessler Trinkowsky. This is a speaker that I have attended many of her sessions at the ATIA conference in Florida. And so she was kind enough to agree to share all of her wisdom. She is the technology training and vocational manager with the Lighthouse of the Palm Beaches. So she comes to us today from Florida. And I think normally in the winter, we would say, oh, how nice she's down in Florida. But I think we're all cooking these days. Doesn't matter where we are. So I will let her share a little bit more about her background and I'll let her take it away. Thank you very much, Rachel. Looking forward to the session.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to the session. And please do use the chat, or there's also Q&A if you have any questions. Laura will be moderating the chat. So if we don't get to it during the presentation, I have some time set aside afterwards that we'll have time for questions. I do work for Lighthouse for the Blind in Palm Beach. We cover 5 counties. And I also am the program coordinator for UMass Boston for the AT program. And that's designed to prepare people for the CATIS certification, which stands for Certified Assistive Technology Instructional Specialist for people with visual impairments. I know it's a mouthful. That's through ACVREP. And I'll share a little bit about some of the other certifications and the importance also of ensuring that when you're providing services for AT, for people with vision loss, whether they're blind or have low vision, to ensure that you have qualified professionals involved in collaborating during the assessment, as well as throughout the training process. On the screen, I have a collage of pictures of different screen readers and assistive technology. There's a back button showing TalkBack, which is one of the screen readers for Android. There's a logo for the narrator screen reader for Windows, and then an icon for Chromevox, which is a screen reader for Chromebook computers. There's a accessibility icon for Apple, and then the magnifier toolbar for Windows as well. So our objectives for today are first to describe at least 5 different categories of assistive technology for people who are blind or who have low vision. And we'll certainly talk about more than 5 categories, but what I'm hoping to do today is really just provide an overall tour and just overview of all of the different types of technologies. There's so many different, when we get to specific devices within each of those categories, we have so many options to choose from, which is great because that means informed choice. But we will talk about the overall categories, and we'll touch on some of the more popular options within each of those categories. Our second objective is to identify at least 5 specific technologies used by people who are blind or who have low vision to access computers and mobile devices in a variety of settings. So again, we're going to talk about much more than 5, but hopefully you'll be able to at least have 5 that stand out for you as you move forward. And the third objective is to recommend at least 3 strategies for providing assistive technology services for people who are blind or who have low vision. And I have different tips that I have throughout the presentation that I'll talk about. So first, I have this organized a bit where, when you're providing services, of course, we think of assessment as something that we do first, and it certainly is important to ensure that you have a proper assessment to determine what technologies and what services someone would benefit from. As you do this, you're considering the student's needs, and I use student broadly. I work with people who are in pre-K through 12, all the way up to adults and seniors. So when I use the word student, it really could pertain to any student of any age. But it is important to consider what their needs are in different environments. And then to consider what equipment might help them meet their needs. So informed choice is really critical. If we as professionals, are working with someone and we make all the decisions without considering their input and what works best for them, we're probably going to fail as far as the best placement of specific devices. So informed choice is really important, and we need to be sure that we're looking at different devices and having someone demonstrate, trial different devices to ensure that it's the best fit for their needs. Also, we need to consider compliance with laws. I'm not going to get into various laws within this presentation, but I do have a reference here for Presley and D'Andrea, and there's many other references that you could refer to for laws that pertain to different settings and different environments. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important to ensure that qualified staff or collaborators are involved in the assessment. So that could be CATIS, that could be certified low vision therapists, that could be low vision specialists who are typically optometrists or sometimes ophthalmologists. It could be teachers of visual impairments. It could be other professionals in the field as well. And there is a link here for if you're interested in locating a CATIS near you. I have a link to identify certified CATIS from ACVREP. And I'm not sure if Laura, can you fit in how they received the PowerPoint or where they would be able to get that?
Sure. I will be sending out a PDF of the PowerPoint along with the survey. Okay. So they will have this handout.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure. So throughout this, I have a number of resources that you could refer to later. And this link on slide 3 is a link to determine who's certified in your area as a CATIS or in other ACVREP certifications. It doesn't have contact information, but it will give you an idea if you know people in your area. One of those names may stand out, or you could also reach out to ACVREP if you're not sure who's the closest CATIS or other professional to you. So another important, starting at low tech or no tech devices, moving forward, sometimes it's, we overlook some of the simpler solutions that may not necessarily involve electronics or technology. So it is important to consider some low tech or no tech devices, such as large print, handheld magnifiers, touch or bump dots. So these are dots that you typically could get in some of the catalog companies. There's a number of links that I have for some of those catalog companies where you could find these online, but they're typically dots where you could put on keyboards or home appliances or anything else where someone might need a little tactile marker. Of course, lighting is an important consideration, and there's many different types of lighting that could benefit someone in different environments. There's more portable options for lighting, of course, lighting that would be permanent, built into a room. And there's also different types of light bulbs. And some of those produce different types of light that may make it easier for someone to see. So that's a pretty important consideration. Markers, so it could be simple markers that are not tactile, but it also could be something like raised line markers. So large lined or raised line paper, that's another useful tool for some people, just either having large lines or you could actually purchase raised line paper where the lines just are raised a bit from the paper itself. So there's 3 catalog companies if you want to explore on slide 4, from maxiaids.com. LS&S is another catalog. These are great resources there's so much with all of these different catalog companies. There's many different options to choose from, and Independent Living Aids is one other. These are not a complete list, but these are 3 of the bigger catalog companies that are available. So moving on to high-tech devices, we have things like electronic video magnifiers. So many of you might know these as CCTVs. And the term CCTV is a bit outdated, although it is used much more frequently. CCTV stands for closed circuit television. So sometimes it's confused with the security systems. So electronic video magnifier would refer to those same devices, just a newer term. And those come in many different categories, which I'll talk about a little further. Another overall category is optical character recognition, OCR. And OCR is the type of technology that allows you to take either a digital page of text or a printed page of text and either scan it in and then you're converting it from that image into readable text. One thing with OCR that I do want to stress is it's not a solution for not providing accessible materials in an accessible format. When you use OCR, it will take the page of text, whether it's in the computer or a device or on a page on a page or even on a wall. It will take that print and it will convert it and it will read it. However, there will be issues with the translation in some cases. It could be due to lighting or the quality of the text on the page itself. There could be many factors. If there are tables or graphics or other information, that is not translated very well. And even if it captures the text, sometimes it could be out of context. If there's images, it's not going to go in and add alt text to those images. If there needs to be headings to help someone navigate more fluidly through a document, those won't be available. So even if there's bolder text, those won't translate as headings when you use OCR. So it is very important. OCR is a great technology, but it's just important to understand it doesn't replace the need to provide accessible materials. Braille and tactile technologies is another overall category, and there's many different options within this category we'll talk about. Screen magnification software. So these are the options that will magnify internally from what's on the screen. So as opposed to me having a handheld magnifier or an electronic video magnifier and looking at some print, screen magnification software is within the computer or mobile device itself. And screen reading software is another big category in our field. So that would include things like JAWS, Narrator, Chromevox, NVDA, VoiceOver on Apple computers or iOS or iPad OS products. So screen reader basically allows you to take what's on the screen and it will read it out loud, as well as if you have a refreshable Braille display, it can also power that Braille display to produce a tactile version in Braille of what the screen reader would be saying out loud. So, and also another difference with screen reading software is instead of using a mouse, typically someone would use either gestures or keyboard commands to navigate. So they would use some method of navigating that doesn't require vision. It's often confused. Screen reading software is often confused by some. It's not the same as simple text to speech software. So when you have something, that's just simple text to speech software that will say read just text on a page, like read and write is an example, right? So that's one that it has text to speech features. It's not a full screen reader. It won't read the information about the operating system and all of the information on the toolbar of different applications. And typically it's used within, as an extension. And I'm only giving that as one example, but it's usually used either as an extension or a specific app or software that's standalone, where a screen reader will allow you to access the entire operating system, different applications, and then everything within the application, of course, that is accessible. Another category is menu-driven accessible software. And these are what I would consider easier to use. They're typically less versatile. There are some options in this category on Android devices. I have not seen one on Mac OS or iOS or iPad OS, but there are some options. Guide Connect is one option. It's from a company called Dolphin, and CDesk is another option from. CDesk is actually not commercially available, but they do have a free version available. So because it's not being updated, it may not maintain compatibility with newer versions of Windows, but it is still available. And I have had some students use it even recently. Guide Connect is a pretty powerful program, and I'll talk a little more about that later. So these are options that really are more self-contained, menu-driven, and just let someone use keyboard commands, or now most of those are also tied in with touchscreen gestures if you do have a touchscreen, or you could also use the mouse. So they're not quite screen magnification and screen reading because they have those features built into the application, but they do have functions of screen reading software and screen magnification software built into that self-contained platform. Another huge category is smartphone and tablet accessibility. So these are accessible, these also have accessible apps, which is really what makes these devices pretty amazing. You know, iPhones, Android devices, iPads, Android tablets, Fire OS, so Kindle devices. We have so many options. Almost all of the major operating systems now have built-in accessibility features, not only for screen magnification and screen reading, but also for people with other disabilities or who need other accessibility features. So it's pretty powerful on most of these operating systems. And then when you add these accessible apps, really the options are limitless. Orientation, mobility, and wayfinding solutions, that's another broad category, and there's many different options within each of those different subcategories. And then of course there's many other accessible options, including digital talking books, digital recorders, ebooks, readers, and so much more. So let's talk about the timing of an assistive technology assessment. It is ongoing. So I mentioned earlier that yes, the assessment is typically where you want to start, but it shouldn't stop there. When you're working with students and providing technology throughout the training process, you do want to make sure that it still does appear, you know, is this the right device? Are the training strategies working? Do we need to adjust how we're teaching, how to use this device, or do we need to consider other options? So the assessment really is ongoing throughout. And no person is too young or too old. There's not necessarily a great, a right time to do assessment. Although of course, if you're starting a new training program, or if you're looking at purchasing specific devices, or if your students looking at purchasing devices for themselves, it really is important to start with a proper assessment to help them make the best decision. And this can be done at any time if there are changes in need, vision, or other circumstances. So if someone switches to a new school, or if they start a university program, if they start a new job, it really is important to assess their needs within each of those environments. For example, if they have a new job and we need to make sure that they have the right accommodations, that their AT is compatible, or really that the software they're using on the job is compatible with their AT, are workarounds needed to ensure that they're able to do the job. So it really is important to reassess, and that assessment would look very different than an assessment to determine what types of technology someone would need at the beginning, because they already have those in place. And it could also mean that they may need different technologies for that specific work environment. Low vision devices. So there's three general categories of low vision devices, and really there are more, but most low vision devices will fit into one of these overall categories. So that includes non-optical devices, optical devices. So non-optical would be some of the devices I mentioned earlier, is just large, markers, tactile marks. It could be just, some of those other simpler low tech, no tech options, where optical devices would include things like magnifiers, stand magnifiers, handheld magnifiers. There's magnifiers that you could get on an arm with a light, without a light, with, so many different levels of magnification. Typically, when you're looking at an assessment for optical devices, I would strongly recommend working with a low vision specialist, who's typically an optometrist. And you really want to make sure that they have a thorough low vision evaluation to ensure that those devices meet their needs and that they're being assessed by someone who's qualified to make that decision. So that's very important for optical devices. For video magnifiers, that could include things like the electronic video magnifier CCTVs that you're probably familiar with. It could include anything from small handheld devices that may fit in your pocket to little larger devices that might fit in a bag or a pouch, to portable devices that you could carry and set up that almost look like maybe a desktop video magnifier, and then all the way up to the devices that are 30, 40 pounds that you're going to plant in one place and probably not move very frequently because they're just heavy. So there's so many different options. There's options with flex arms, and I'll talk about some of those subcategories. Non-optical devices, so like I said, large print. And large print, if we look at the definition for free matter for the blind, it must be 14 point or larger. For information, I have a link for free matter for the blind from NLS, which is the National Library Service. And in general, it really depends. I have here that 18 point font or larger is recommended. There is a trick though, because this really is an individualized need, where if someone has field loss, larger print may make it more difficult for them to be able to read. So you really want to consider each person's needs and what will work best for them. Reading stands, so stands that are slant stands or simple reading stands that you could get in an office supply store. Slant stands are a little more flexible because you can write on them, and they'll support a little more weight if someone needs to both read and write. The reading stands that you typically would find in like Office Depot or Office Max, most of those, if you try writing, that they'll usually fall over. They're a little more flimsy, but slant stands tend to be more sturdy. Lighting, again, many different lighting options. So types of lighting. We have natural light, which would just be if someone has a window or is working outdoors or can adjust just the natural light coming into the space that they're in. Incandescent light, fluorescent light, LEDs. So I have an example here of OT lights, and OT lights are, they produce, of course, in an artificial way, something that's close to what we would consider as sunlight or natural light. And there's a link here if you'd like to learn more about OT lights. There's a FAQ for that. Halogen lights, and again, many different categories. These come in so many different sizes, and there's a lot of flexibility. Sometimes someone may need a light where they could adjust it and really pull it right onto the task. So they may need something on an arm or something that they could carry with them and move around. Optical devices. So with optical devices, as I mentioned, should be prescribed by a low vision specialist. So highly recommend a low vision evaluation before really considering which types of optical devices would be best. Some examples, I've mentioned some of these, but handheld magnifiers, lighted magnifiers, stand magnifiers that basically they're on a stand, and as you move them, it keeps the distance for the magnifier to the page or to the object the same as you're moving those around. And then there's many different types of telescopes, including monoculars. So someone would be wearing a pair of glasses, or it could be a monocular that they just hold up to their eye, and also microscopes. So these could be used for magnifying close up or also magnifying at a distance. Typically monoculars are used for magnifying at a distance, but there's also microscopes that could be used for really enlarging what's right in front of you. some important magnification concepts. When magnification increases, the field of view decreases. I know this is this seems very simple, but it's important to really think about this, because the larger magnification, the less that you're going to be able to see at that time. So, and this goes whether you're using optical devices or whether you're using screen magnification on a computer or a mobile device. So the higher the magnification, it may make it more difficult for people with visual field loss. So if someone has field loss where they could only see a certain percent or out of a certain portion of their eye, more magnification in some instances may make it more difficult for them to be able to access that information. Higher level magnifications typically require more illumination. So with this, I'm referring more to either print or objects that are outside of the device itself. So if you have higher magnification, it may be important to consider a device that has built-in lighting. And again, training is needed. So depending on the type of device, either CATIS, a certified low vision therapist, a teacher of the visually impaired, TVI, or another professional. Electronic video magnifiers. So these come in so many different categories. I mentioned the term CCTV is still used. However, it does refer to closed circuit television. So that is sometimes confused with security camera systems. Handheld portable devices are just as they sound. So they're devices that you could either hold in your hand. Some of them have a handle that may open where you could hold it using a handle. Others may just be small and not have a handle. The price range really does vary for these different devices. One thing to consider also is that many mobile devices, really depending on the quality of the camera, you might have different results, but an iPhone, an iPod Touch, an iPad, Android tablet, Fire tablet, these all have built-in cameras. So you can use them either with the built-in camera itself or with certain apps that are designed to allow for some replication of these video magnification features. And there's many different options with those mobile devices. Another category for electronic video magnifiers is that they're the transportable. So these would be devices that I would still say that these are portable, but with transportable, we're referring to something that's probably not going to go in a small bag or a pocket or a purse. So with transportable, these are typically devices that either have their own case or maybe can be folded up and put in a backpack or something like that. It really depends on the device, but there's a lot of different options with these transportable devices where you can fold them up and they will look just like a desktop CCTV. With others, maybe it has something that looks like a tablet that folds out and it opens up, maybe sits on a desk. There's there's also options where it has a monitor and a camera, and you could flip the camera to either distance or near or down on a page. So you have a lot of flexibility with these. And then the desktop models would be those that are really designed to sit in one place. The transportable and even portable, the features that are available in some of these devices, that I think it's pretty incredible. They've even added some of the OCR, that optical character recognition, to some of those portable devices. But the desktop models typically are designed where you have the most ergonomic situation where someone would be able to sit in the best posture to be able to use these devices. Often, not always, but often they have what's called an XY table. So you're able to move the materials or the object using an XY table to keep it even as you go from left to right or up and down. And then there's FlexArm models. So these are devices that could just have basically a camera on an arm, or the device, the camera itself could be connected to another device. But there's so many different options with the FlexArms. And then head mounted. So we have a number of devices now. There's a new version of the Jordy, eSight, CyberEyes, there's New Eyes. If I'm leaving any out, it's not big, there's so many different devices, and this is another category where a low vision evaluation, I think, is really critical to make sure that someone not only is getting the best advice, but that they're getting the best training to understand how to use it. A lot of the head-mounted devices now, that not all, but many of them also have a number of the same features that you would find in some of the mobile apps that for accessibility. Some have object identification, barcode scanning. Some even have where they'll do some version of facial recognition. So there's many, and also OCR. So there's a lot of different features built into these. And one thing really important when you're looking at these devices is not to stay focused on one specific device, but really to focus more on the features that each person needs. It's really important to focus on that first and then branch out to start looking at, okay, which devices meet these specific needs. And then you could start narrowing it down to different devices that you could look at for demonstrations or bringing vendors in to demonstrate different products. Some features available in video magnifiers, and it does vary by model. I mentioned XY tables, and sometimes these, not always, but these often will have friction breaks and margin stops. And with that, you could adjust how far it will go from left to right. So you could, if you have a smaller book, you could adjust the margin so it doesn't go all the way to the right where there's no text, or all the way to the left. Friction breaks also will help you adjust how difficult or how easy it is to move. Some, if the friction breaks are set where you just touch the XY table and it will just fly over to the right, that may be a little bit too loose. So you may need to adjust that. You don't want it to be too difficult to move, but you want it to have a good balance where it's not sliding too fast. Kind of the same thing as using a mouse. If someone's using a mouse on a screen and it's zipping across too quickly, sometimes you could adjust that as well. So very similar. Color settings and reverse polarity. So these really do vary. Most of the different devices have various preset color options. Some even allow you to customize the color settings. Reverse polarity lets you adjust whether it's white on black, black on white. So you could adjust that too, depending on what works best for someone or what's working best for that person in that moment. There's so many different viewing modes too. So with viewing modes, you may have different combinations of being able to view near, view distance, or also self-viewing. And sometimes you have devices that have, excuse me, I'm gonna take a sip.
Rachel, this is Laura. We've lost your audio.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. So with the viewing modes, what I was saying, sorry about that. Sometimes you have a camera that allows you to view the object near, and sometimes distance, sometimes self-viewing. And then you have different combinations where you may have 2 or even 3 built into one single camera and one single device. The autofocus or manual focus. So many of the devices today they're typically autofocus. Where this becomes a problem is if you have some kind of object that you're working with, or a manual task that someone's doing, and you need to adjust the manual focus to adjust to different portions of that object. That's really where manual focus can be important. So that's another feature that you may want to consider depending on the task that someone's going to use the device for. Line features. So this allows someone to place line markers so that it will help them read or follow along in certain portions of a book or text. And of course, monitor size, many different versions of monitors. Often it's thought of that larger monitors are, the larger the monitor, the better. And that's not necessarily the case. So there is such a thing as a monitor that's too large. I've walked in on someone who purchased a device and was so proud to show it to me. And I'm pretty short. I'm about 5'1.5 inches, and she's shorter than me. I think she was probably about 4'10", 4'11", and she purchased a 50-inch TV connected to an electronic video magnifier that was off to the side. And when she sat down in her chair off to the side, she had to look up and over to the right. And literally, I saw her leaning up out of her chair. And she was an older woman. She was in her late 80s. So it was very difficult for her to move. And fortunately, we were able to work with that vendor at a later point to help her get a device that was a better fit for her. But you really do want to consider that if someone's sitting in front of a monitor, that they're able to move their eyes without doing a whole lot of movement of their head, neck, or back to be able to see the full screen. So the monitor size that's ideal for each person really could vary based on how they're sitting, what type of work they're doing. And the best thing to do is really get in front of the monitor to make sure that it's not too big and that they're still able to maintain a good position and ergonomic positioning as they're using that monitor. Computer compatibility. So some of these devices also have split screen, and that could be a little misleading. So the split screen will allow you to have a computer or other device, typically a computer, connected to the same monitor. So usually with split screen, you're able to split so you could see half of what's on the electronic video magnifier and then half of what's on the computer screen. And often you're able to adjust the proportion so you could see more or less of each of those different devices. What it doesn't do is it doesn't magnify what's on the computer screen. It basically just serves as a monitor for the computer. So often with some of these devices, you're able to have a split screen view as well as switching full to the computer and full to the electronic video magnifier. So that could really be ideal for someone who needs, has maybe small space and just needs to use that one monitor that's already built into their electronic video magnifier as their same monitor for their computer. And of course, OCR. So many of these devices now have OCR features to be able to take that text, convert it, and then be able to read it out loud. Portability also varies, and Presley and Andrea discuss many of these different features of electronic video magnifiers. Some advantages of video magnifiers. So compared to other devices, video magnifiers, they do have a flexibility of magnification levels. So compared to some of those optical devices, you have a handheld magnifier, it's going to be one level of magnification and that's it. So with these electronic video magnifiers, you're able to adjust the magnification levels. Color adjustments, the lighting, usually most of these devices have lighting, often where you could turn it on and off, that varies. They're often more ergonomic, and there's many other features. So now let's talk a little bit deeper about OCR. OCR is optical character recognition, and this allows a user to take a picture or scan text, and then it converts that text from an image, and then it could be read aloud and then even edited in some situations. So with some applications for OCR, it brings it into, you're either able to copy and paste it into a word processor, or some of these also have their own built-in word processors. And OCR can also be performed on electronic documents. So if, often I've worked with people who will take something from their computer, they'll print it and then scan it back in. So it's important to know that if you have it already in a digital format, it's best to keep it in that format. And you could use some kind of a software or app to convert it using OCR. And then if you need to edit it, that's really important, especially if you're providing it for someone else. Some software options will also allow to convert images, PDFs, or other inaccessible digital files to readable text files. And then screen reading software or built-in audio software can be used to read the text out loud. And again, I won't go deep into this, I already talked, but OCR alone does not fix accessibility issues. Just really important to make sure that this isn't being used as a means of accessibility, because OCR alone doesn't fix that. If you are, it could be part of the process. So if you are assisting and providing accessible materials and you only have an inaccessible image of that text, then you could certainly start with OCR and then make sure you're editing that text to ensure that it's correct and accurate. And then the next step would be to go in and make sure you're adding any accessibility attributes such as headings, accessible links, alt text, and so forth. Some accessible OCR options. We have OCR software, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the specifics in a minute. We have standalone OCR devices. So those would be devices that, typically they're just off by itself. It's just, many of these just look like a scanner or a document camera, and they're really, their sole purpose is to take pictures and read it out loud. And then OCR apps. So this really is endless. There's more and more popping up all the time. There's also OCR features built into other apps that have other features. So we have many, many different options in this category. OCR is also built into electronic video magnifiers. So many of those also have that OCR feature. And then there's other options with OCR. So there's a number of different standalone devices as well. The software options for OCR include DocuScan Plus. This was originally from Ceratech, but it's now Numa Solutions. I hope I'm saying that right. So DocuScan Plus is one of the applications that you could use on a Windows computer. I believe it may be also compatible with Mac OS. I'm not certain, but this would be software that you would purchase and install. It's a little less expensive than some of the other options that are designed specifically for people with vision loss that are accessible in and of themselves. Open Book. So this one is about $1,000. So this one has many other features, and there's so many different options. So I would look at some of the other options that may be less costly before looking at the software that's $1,000, just because there's many even third-party options as well. Kurzweil 1000, and not to be confused with Kurzweil 3000. Kurzweil 1000 is specifically similar to OpenBook. It's designed specifically for people who are blind or have low vision and need that OCR feature. So both OpenBook and Kurzweil have a number of different features. They're really just packed with other feature sets, and you have a lot of flexibility as far as adjusting the scanning settings, the reading settings, being able to save it to a computer. So they do offer a lot of flexibility. OmniPage from Nuance, that's another third-party option that is not specific for people with vision loss, but it's available and certainly can be used. The menu-driven programs that I mentioned, Guide Connect and CDesk, they both have built-in OCR. So if you're using one of those, then the OCR is built right into it, and you could use that as one of the features within those menu-driven applications. And JAWS and NVDA, both of those screen readers now have OCR built in. NVDA is working with the Windows OCR, where JAWS has a number of different OCR features that you could use to take digital images of different portions of the screen. You could actually, their features keep growing, but you could actually take a OCR an image that you've scanned in. You could OCR a window or a control. So really, they've added some great flexibility for how specific you can get with those OCR features. If you have a PDF that's not accessible, you can use OCR with JAWS to OCR that inaccessible PDF. So a lot of different options, even with those built-in screen readers. And there's many more, many different other options for OCR. Standalone options. So these include, they're often easier to use. So that's one of the benefits. They're usually designed to be simple with very clear, either line tactile buttons or low vision, or sometimes both. So these are some examples would be the Sarah CE reading appliance from Freedom Scientific. I have a link here if you'd like to learn about the Smart Reader from Enhanced Vision, and there's a video from the Chicago Lighthouse. But that's another very standalone OCR. It basically sits on a desk and it has a camera that flips up, and then you're able to just use it. So very, very portable device. And other OCR options, so different apps. We have the KNFB Reader mobile app. That's an app for, actually you could put it on Windows, Android, iOS, iPadOS. And this is, the K stands for Kurzweil, for Ray Kurzweil, and NFB is National Federation of the Blind. So they partnered together to develop this app, and that is something that's available for purchase, and you could use that on many different operating systems. It's pretty flexible. Seeing AI, Envision AI, and there's other apps with OCR. Seeing AI and Envision AI, those are both available with a number of other features, and Seeing AI calls it channels. So there's different channels to do barcode scanning. There's handwriting recognition. It's a pretty powerful app, and that one is free for iOS devices. Envision AI, I believe you could use on either Android or iOS. And there are, I think they have a subscription plan. They've changed their model a bit, I believe, but Envision AI, and they actually have glasses that they've developed that are available for purchase for OCR and some of these other features as well. There's also OCR built into electronic video magnifiers. So as an example, if you'd like to learn more, I have a link to the eBot Pro from HIMSS. And that's a video from the Chicago Lighthouse. So if you'd like to learn more or have an example of that to watch, again, it's just one example of many. And there's wearable options. So the wearable options, a popular one would also be the Orcam My Eye. And that, basically is just a, there's different versions of the Orcam. So there's a version that's handheld, and there's a version that you have attached to a pair of glasses. So you could look at certain portions of text, and when you touch on the text, it will read out loud, and it has other features built in. So there's different versions of Orcam. Some have more features than the other options within the Orcam family. And there's also many other OCR software options, and many OCR devices and software are compatible with refreshable Braille displays, which is also important. So if someone needs to use a refreshable Braille display, or that's a better output mode for them, it's important to consider which device will be compatible with a refreshable Braille display. Accessible books. We have a number of options in this category, but National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, the Library of Congress, NLS, they have BARD, which is the Braille and Audio Reading Download Service, and that is free for anyone who qualifies. So I would definitely recommend looking into that. DAISY audiobooks are one of the popular formats that are used for accessible books. Other audiobook sources include Learning Ally, Bookshare, Audible, and there's other proprietary services and formats. So definitely recommend exploring. And of course, there's many different apps available as well for accessible books. Sorry about that. Get those under control. All right, so ebook readers. I have two examples here. On the left is the talking book player that comes with the National Library Service, and this one is designed intentionally to be very easy to use. It's color coded. When this was originally designed, they collaborated with Humanware. So if it actually, I have the example of the Victor Reader Stream on the right, and although it's not color coded quite the same way, the tactile buttons actually are shaped very similar. So the play pause button is somewhat of a rectangular shape in the center on the bottom, and then the forward and back are triangles pointing to the right and left on either side. And there's a number of other buttons on the talking book player for for going to sleep and so forth. The Victor Reader Stream basically is it's about the size of a phone. A little bit thicker usually, but depending on the phone that you have, but it's a little bit thicker, but it's about the size of a typical handheld mobile phone. And it has a keypad on the front, a sleep button. So I just have these here. So you just have a reference of the design that goes into these accessible devices. And the Victor Reader Stream is just one of many different accessible devices. There's also a number of accessible software options for accessing books on a computer or mobile device as well. And there's links if you want to learn more about the Victor Reader Stream or the NLS digital audiobook players. The link for the NLS digital audiobook players and Braille book readers, that will give you a number of other options if you're looking for accessible audiobook players. I mentioned earlier that larger monitors may help, so just keep that in mind, that you do want to really consider the size of the monitor and ensure that you're not getting something so large where someone's going to have to move their body and neck and back in order to see the different portions of the screen. Let's talk about Braille and tactile technologies. So we have Braille embossers. So these are essentially Braille printers. And with these, we do need something that powers the Braille printer unless there's a built-in application within the Braille printer itself. But so that would be Braille translation software. And the Braille translation software allows you to have text and then be able to convert it and then emboss it and send it like you would to a printer, but it sends it to the embosser instead. Then we have refreshable Braille displays and keyboards. So these often go together. So many refreshable Braille displays, if you are shopping for them, you'll see that they also have keyboards built in with the Braille keys. But many also only have just the refreshable Braille and no keyboard. So different people have different preferences. You definitely want to make sure that you have the best device. There's not as many just standalone Braille keyboards, but you could still find some. They're a little harder to find when you're just looking for something with the Braille keyboard without a refreshable Braille display. And Braille note takers. So these would be devices that are designed. They're much more simple than what we would think is, something that just takes notes. But Braille note takers, the features will vary, but when we use the term note taker, we're typically talking about a device that at the very least has a word processor. And some just simply have a word processor and nothing more. That is still available in some of the refreshable Braille displays that have just basic word processing. And you would need to connect it to a computer as a refreshable Braille display to do really much more than that. But some Braille note takers, like the Braille Sense Polaris and the Braille Note Touch Plus, those are Android devices, and the feature set is incredible. So you could do much more. I mean, there's, access calendars, really anything that you would do on a mobile device, you would be able to do on these devices in an accessible format. Electronic braillers, so these would include things like these would be, other than just the simple mechanic Perkins braillers that really are just mechanical, and you would be able to type in Braille on those. The Perkins Smart Brailler and the Mountbatten Brailler models, there's a number of them. Those are two examples of devices that are electronic braillers. So they look very similar, but typically they're either going to have a battery or plug in or both. And with these, you often could do much more than just just type in Braille and have it be produced on paper. They also have other features. So some advantages of Braille, of course, understanding the layout and format of a printed page. Reading print or Braille, it's truly critical for literacy. So, definitely if you have a student who would benefit from Braille, I would recommend either putting them in touch with a community rehabilitation program like Lighthouse, or if you have another similar agency with a different name in your area, or if it's a student in pre-K through 12, making sure that they're in touch with a teacher of the visually impaired who can provide them instruction as needed. And also this other advantage of Braille is it provides repetitive opportunities to review spellings of words, names, and other information. So let's talk about Braille translation and tactile graphic software. And there are a number of different options. I'll talk about some of the more popular options available today. One of the most popular that's been around a long time is Duxbury. So Duxbury is a Braille translation software. It is available for purchase, and I do have a link if anyone would like to explore that on slide 25. Tiger Suite software, and this is from View Plus, and typically when you purchase an embosser from that's made by View Plus, it will typically come with the Tiger Suite software available. So you may have to update it as new features are available, but usually when you purchase a new embosser, it comes with it. And there's different versions. There's a difference between just producing tactile, just Braille, and tactile graphics. So when you're looking at different embossers, some embossers have graphics capability where they could produce tactile graphics, and others do not. Braille Blaster is a free. It's came out of a project that they developed, a free Braille translation application. So there's a link here if you'd like to explore. Since it is free, anyone could download it. If you don't have an embosser, you won't be able to emboss, but you will be able to see here. I'll open that up real quick. I'm not going to go too deep with this, but I'll show you. I'll just Braille Blaster. I'll just show you as I type a word, and when I hit enter, it immediately translates it to Braille and will display on the right side. Still opening up. All right, so we're in Braille Blaster, and I'll just type hello. And when I hit enter, it appears in the right in Braille. So if I emboss this right now on my embosser, it would just type in the word hello. You're also able to copy and paste text here. One of the great things about this is you can format it. There's a number of different formatting for styling, for headings, lists, built right into the application. So it's a great way to create accessible materials, and it is free. Just going to go ahead and exit that. All right, Firebird software suite, that's another option from Enabling Technologies, and that typically comes with specific embossers that when you purchase that, it would typically come with the Firebird tactile graphic software. And I have links available to learn about some of those different translation programs, so if you want to learn more. Embossers, so essentially are Braille printers, and there's a variety of different features. So one is double-sided embossing, which is inner point embossing. And this allows you to emboss on both sides. So definitely paper saving, because you're able to emboss on both sides of the paper. There's also a feature for inner-line Braille that has text above the Braille, which could be a useful feature if you have both sighted and Braille readers looking at the same document. Compatibility with smartphones and tablets. So that's another important consideration. If someone's going to be using a smartphone, a tablet, or an accessible note taker, you do want to make sure that the embosser is compatible with the device that you have. There's also various printing speeds. You can emboss in different size Braille cells with some embossers, not all, but some do allow you to print. So if someone did need larger Braille, large Braille, then some of those do have that option available. And some have tactile graphics capability, others do not. The noise level can often be a problem with some embossers, and sometimes you could purchase some kind of cover or stand to help with that. We have one for one of our embossers at the Lighthouse that's just quite loud. We've had it for many years, and it keeps working. It's a Romeo 25, so it's an older model, but it's just quite loud. So we purchased a case for it, so it helps reduce, not remove the noise, but it helps reduce it. Also, the different sizes of paper. So often with many of the embossers, you'll need to use a specific weight of Braille paper, but some will also allow different weights of paper, sizes, single sheets, tractor feed, etc. So that's another important consideration, is the type of paper, and also considering the cost of the paper, because that will weigh in, even if you're looking at the initial cost of the embosser, but looking at the ongoing cost of the specific paper that will be needed. There's an image here of the Focus 14 Blue from Freedom Scientific, and this has 14 cells. It does have a Braille keyboard, so it is 8-dot, but it's the 6 dots for the Braille cell, and then enter and backspace. But it also can be used to type in computer Braille, which would be 8-dot Braille. And then there's some buttons on the bottom, which are considered thumb keys. There's a space down underneath Refreshable Braille. Above the Braille cells are cursor routing buttons, and those can be used to either click on an item if you touch it and you're focused on it, or to move the cursor to a specific item as you're typing. So kind of like if you were to take a mouse and click on a specific letter, you could use that in a similar way.
Rachel, this is Laura.
Yeah.
I just saw a clarification in chat. Someone is wondering how quickly the information is put into Braille format, such as when you entered from Braille Blaster. And from what I could tell, when you entered that, it almost was instant. As soon as you hit enter, it was placed. You know, it was already showing that Braille.
Yes, it didn't. When I typed hello, what it's doing is I have it set to translate to contracted Braille. And you could also adjust the settings. So you could change the type of Braille output, but I have mine set to UEB contracted. So which is what we're using here in the US, but you could also set it to uncontracted. But when I hit enter, it knew that there wasn't going to be anything else after hello. So it automatically showed on the right. It's also, so it's really just embossing as you go, but I wouldn't look, like even on the Mountbatten as an example, the Mountbatten is an electronic Brailler. So it literally puts it on the page for me as I type. But if I type a word that has a contraction, it waits until I type enough where it can only be a specific set of Braille characters. So there's a lag as I'm typing on something like a Mountbatten before it will actually show in Braille on the printed page. It's a little bit of a different device than what I was showing you here, but kind of the same idea where the Braille just lags behind. And the reason for that is it's waiting to ensure that the contractions will be correct and that it has enough text. So sometimes that can mean hitting enter or space, but with something like Duxbury or Tiger Suite, you have to perform a command to translate it. It doesn't do it automatically for you. So you do want to make sure that before you do that command, that you have the Braille code to the correct Braille language or Braille output that you want it to be set to.
Thank you.
Okay. So I have a slide here, and this is really just showing a progression of different Braille note takers, not in any way inclusive of the range of different Braille note takers that we've gone through, but the term PDA, really personal data assistant, it's really not used anymore, but accessible computing devices like these could have any number of the features that I have listed, or even many more, because as I mentioned, the newer Braille note takers are also Android devices. So you could add different apps to those, and there's a lot more flexibility, and that flexibility probably will continue to grow. So some of the features I already mentioned, but like word processor, email, internet, calendar, address book, and some may or may not have refreshable Braille displays. There are devices that are designed, without a Braille display, but many of these do have refreshable Braille displays. And then whether it has a keyboard, there are some options now that do have QWERTY keyboards that are similar to the Windows style keyboard that most of us are familiar with, or they would have the standard Braille keyboard. And then there's other features available on a number of these devices. But from left to right, I have the Braille and Speak, which really isn't available anymore. But that was one of the first types of Braille devices. There was no refreshable Braille display. It basically just had a keyboard and a speech synthesizer. And then on the right is a early version of the Braille Lite. And then to the right of that is a later version of a Braille Lite. And again, these both do have refreshable Braille display and the 6-dot Braille with enter and backspace where your pinkies would be, and then a space. The original Braille Lite, well, I'm not sure that's the original, but the one that I have listed here does not have the enter and backspace. It just has the 6 dots for the Braille cell, the space, and refreshable Braille display. So they later added those pinky, those pinky keys for enter, backspace, and also to be able to produce 8 cell Braille, which is what we use for computer Braille. And that allows us to have even more Braille symbols. And then to the right are, these are older versions, but these are some of the most recent to what we have available now for the Braille Sense Polaris and the Braille Note. That's a Braille Note prior to the Braille Note Touch. So those are some older versions, just to kind of show some of the evolution. The newest versions and the Braille Note Touch Plus and the Braille Sense Polaris are not the only two options out there. They're certainly the more popular ones here in the US, but there are other Braille note takers that have more limited functionality as well that are popular in the US. But these are the two, I would say, Cadillacs of just note taking. Operating system features. So we have different features built into the operating system, including display properties, screen resolution, mouse pointer, font sizes, DPI, which is dots per inch, which is now called scaling on Windows, but that's basically a setting that you could use just for built-in accessibility. You do want to be careful if you do adjust the scaling or DPI settings, that it could conflict with some of the third-party assistive technology software. So often you want to have that set to just standard 100% if you are installing other third-party applications. And then, of course, built-in accessibility features are available for screen reading, screen magnification, and other features. So the importance of touch typing. Typing is a very important skill. So this should be a prerequisite to technology training. There's options if someone does need one-handed or a modified typing mode. There's many different options that you could work with. There's also options for sticky keys on pretty much all of the major operating systems available today, even mobile operating systems. If you connect a keyboard, there's options for sticky keys. And there's also other operating system features. So dictation and voice recognition, the power of these has gotten, I mean, they work incredibly well, but they still have limitations. And if someone is able to fall back, even as a backup, you know, I've had one student where she used voice recognition as her primary mode of input, but she learned to type with one finger and touch type with one finger. So she was able to make corrections if she needed to. It's not ideal. It's not her primary mode, but it is important to consider, you know, to help someone be as functional and productive as possible, to look at, you know, if they're able to type, what would be a good mode. And again, not to replace the need for voice recognition or dictation, but at least to supplement it. I'm not going to talk, there's so many different options for typing software out there that are mainstream. The ones I have listed are only the ones that are accessible for people who are blind or have low vision and that are fully accessible. So the first one is Typer Online. This is free. It's from APH, and there is a link to that in the slides. So that's on 32. So that one is fully accessible and it's web-based. So you could access it on different operating systems. Typio is a great one for, I would say, younger children or really early elementary, maybe into middle school. It has some games built in. It's really fun for students who are first learning to type. And Accessibyte is the company that makes Typio. They've done a great job of ensuring it's accessible and works well for people with vision loss, but they have a number of other features, and they have a suite available. So you may want to explore some of the other options they have. Typing Club is another really great, and in some instances, there are free options, and then there's other options and subscriptions for schools or agencies. But Typing Club is another great accessible typing application to help students learn to touch type. Talking Typing Teacher from Marvelsoft. So this one is about $100. This one is, if you do install it, one thing I would say is you're not going to be able to put it on another computer. So if you do purchase this one, it's great for learning to touch type, But once you install it, you can't, they don't let you transfer it to another computer. So just keep that in mind. Talking Typer from APH. So this is the downloadable version of what they now turned into Typer Online. That is still available, and it's available as either a Windows version that's about $80, and there's also a version for iOS, which is $5. So if you have a QWERTY keyboard connected to your iPhone or iPad, you could use Talking Typer. There's an app, and there's a link to learn a little bit more about that for Talking Typer. Another one is typability, and this would specifically be for people who already have the JAWS screen reader. Typability it's essentially a script for JAWS, and that's from Yes Accessible. So it's great. It goes a little bit beyond typing, so it goes into some of the early parts of the early ideas of learning how to navigate on a computer, and it does get into not very deep into instruction, but it does talk about modifier keys and how to perform some of the keyboard commands. But someone would need to have the JAWS screen reader in order to use that. And with that, I think this is probably a good time to take a break. Laura, what do you think?
I think that sounds great. So we wanted to give everyone a few minutes to rest your brains from focusing on all of this great content. So why don't we take about 5 minutes, or actually let's just do 3, and we'll step away. And during the break, if you would, we've got to thank you already for that break. So my watch shows 9:13, so let's head back here, or sorry, 11:13. So let's head back in about 3 to 4 minutes. And in the meantime, if you've got any takeaways from what you've learned so far today, maybe something new that you learned, or a favorite device that you've used in the past and was highlighted, please feel free to put that in the chat. But don't feel obligated to keep staring at your screen. But for those that are going to stick around, feel free to use the chat to maybe share what you've learned so far today, maybe a highlight or something that you've used and you want to share with others. Okay, well, as folks start to trickle back, we had a couple comments that came through in chat. One was actually from Jerry Draz mentioning the ORCAM and how it has made a tremendous impact for that member of their long-term care program. And I see Marianne Barnett is playing the license plate game in chat, so that's always fun. But Marianne did ask if you have a favorite, like the one favorite piece of technology for transition.
Whatever works best for that student.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really the key. Making sure that each student has a proper assessment, and if they're transitioning to college, to a new school, it really varies. So there's not one device. It also depends on what their needs are, what their preferred mode of input and output are, or and also considering secondary, that what they may have a primary mode of input and output, but what's their secondary mode, what really works best for them, and then looking at the features they need in each device.
Yep, and I would agree with that. And I'm glad you mentioned the backup plan, because all the best laid plans can certainly fall apart. So you need to have plan A and plan B as a backup. And then we had one other question is, what is your experience with eyesight technology? And you may be getting to this down the line, so you can feel free to hold that. And you're muted again, Rachel.
They're saying specifically eSight technology. So
yeah.
eSight is it's a head-mounted magnification system. So I would recommend strongly making sure that the person has an assessment. One of the issues when you trial devices, you're trialing them from the vendor, but it's very important to make sure that a low vision specialist is involved with any purchase or assessment for low vision technology. So I highly recommend working with a low vision specialist who doesn't just sell one device, and ideally is familiar with a number of different head mounted devices, so they could talk about the pros and cons of each of the different options, and then really look to see what best fits each person's needs.
Great. And then we've got one more that just is asking about the LEDs in OT lights. Does this type of natural lighting come in overhead lighting? So I'm guessing that they're wondering, if your central fixture in your ceiling, is it possible to use that type of lighting?
You might check with OttLight. I haven't seen it used that way, but I frankly don't know. But there's many different types of. I have a portable OttLight in the other room that I use with my son, and we just set it on the desk wherever he needs it. So it just gives a lot of good natural lighting for him. So I would just recommend looking to see what options, but I'm not sure if they have overhead lighting.
And I would just chime in that, with the use of LED in most home fixtures, it's another opportunity if you're really looking specific for LED. Visit your local home improvement store and take a look at what types of bulbs may be available for a specific fixture, like an overhead lighting. And I think we're ready to roll. Thank you.
Okay. Let me go ahead and share. Okay. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope this is helpful. I really just try to think of the key areas, just giving a good overview. So I do hope that this is helpful to give you an idea of the broad range of different devices and technologies that are available. There are some sections, just for time, I included some areas here where I do have some breakdowns of commands. I'm not going to go deep into those, and for some, I may just skip some of those slides, but I want to point them out so you know they're here in case you do want to come back to get more familiar with some of those commands. I wanted to include them more as a reference, but just for time, we'll probably have to skip a few, getting very deep into the commands for some of the different technologies. So now let's talk about screen magnification. Some of the third-party screen magnification software, and these are available for Windows. They include Zoom Text, which is from Freedom Scientific Vispero, and also Supernova Magnifier, which is from Dolphin. So these are two of the more popular options. Magic was another option, but because of the merger with AI Squared and Freedom Scientific into VFO and now Vispero, Magic and Zoom Text were part of the same organization, and Magic was discontinued as of December of 2020. I believe they stopped support for it. So I don't have Magic included for that reason. So really, Supernova Magnifier, it's not as popular here in the US, but I would definitely recommend looking into it. It's another good magnification program if you want to look and compare or have another option to have people trial when they're looking at third-party screen magnification. And there are others, but these would be two that I would consider really full-featured options, and two also that have excellent support as far as technical support, and you know, that they're really staying up to date with all of the other operating system features with Windows, as well as other applications. Built-in screen magnification software. So really, if you think of any modern operating system today, nearly all of our common modern operating systems have built-in screen magnification features available. So for Mac OS computers, excuse me, we have Zoom, which is the built-in magnification for Mac OS. For Windows, and the computer I'm working on right now is a Windows 10 computer. So we have Windows Magnifier. On Chromebooks, we have both a docked magnifier and a full screen magnifier. For Android and iOS, we have different types of magnification features, but both Android and iOS, iPadOS have full screen magnifier features available on those devices. With Android, it's a little different because we have different versions of Android, right? Samsung has its own version of the Android operating system, right? Fire OS is essentially a different type, although it's really its own operating system now. It's based off of the Android operating system. So that also has the built-in accessibility features, but they're called something different and may work a little bit different on those different versions of Android. And there's others as well. For other less popular operating systems, they usually, even Linux distros usually have some form of built-in screen magnification. So just to quickly demonstrate, I'm going to go ahead and turn on, I'm just going to do a Windows Plus, and I'll turn on my Windows magnifier. And Laura, I think we tested this, but if you could just verify. So if I do Windows Plus, it will just go one increment higher, and I can adjust the increments. So I have it at
correct.
Thank you. I have it at 130%, 135. So I have it set to go in very small increments. The newer version of the magnifier, if you have the new full features for the latest version of Windows 10 with all the feature set installed, it does have some options for text to speech. So I could use that either with the mouse, or there's keyboard commands that I could use to read, similar to the app reader with Zoom Text. It would be how this works. So again, not a full screen reader, but it does have some basic speech built in. I'm going to do a Windows escape to exit that. You know, we won't have time to demonstrate all of the different magnifiers, but you know, they're essentially doing the same thing with the third-party options. They're really there's many different features, and some of the built-in operating the built-in operating system magnification, they may not have as many of these different features, but the third-party options that I mentioned, Zoom Text and Supernova Magnifier, have most of these features, and even some more that I don't have listed. So beyond just magnification, they have different window viewing options, which could include lens, align view, docked, and overlay view, which usually is in the bottom corner, where you're only seeing a portion of the screen magnified at one time. A lens would be kind of like if you were holding a handheld magnifier up to the screen, except it's internally in the computer, and you would move it around either with keyboard commands or the mouse. Also color enhancements. So we could adjust the color of the mouse, of the blinking cursor, of the focus. So that we have a lot of flexibility in what those colors look like with some of these third-party options. And even with it might not be in the screen magnification features on the built-in operating systems, but many Chrome OS, Chromebook, Windows, and even Mac, they have some flexibility of adjusting the size, and in some instances, the color. It depends on the operating system, but you could even adjust the color right within the built-in operating system features. So sometimes you have to look to see where those settings are in each operating system, and they may not be tied specifically to that screen magnifier. We also have options, definitely in ZoomText for font smoothing, where if I were to magnify, it helps to keep me from seeing the pixels as it gets larger and larger, so it doesn't look as blurry. And sometimes focus enhancements that will allow me to put a box or a circle or highlight some focus, so I know where I'm focused on in the screen as I'm navigating, either with keyboard commands or the mouse. And then also I mentioned pointer enhancements. So sometimes not just the color of the blinking cursor, but sometimes we could put some locator around it, or other option where if I hit Control, a locator will appear over the mouse or the pointer. And then the speech features, you can get both Supernova Magnifier and ZoomText with or without speech. And I just do want to clarify, it's not a full screen reader, although both of those options, the speech that comes with the magnifier is basically more like text-to-speech. It's pretty powerful and it works well, but it's not a full screen reader. The versions of ZoomText, which combines ZoomText and JAWS together, that's called Fusion. That is a full screen magnifier and a full screen reader all in one. It's basically JAWS and ZoomText running side by side. Supernova Magnifier has a version that's screen reader and magnifier together. So that also is very similar. It has a full screen reader and a full screen magnifier. But when it just says with speech, that typically would be more like that TTS, that text to speech. So on slide 37, I have some commands, and I did mention I'm going to skip over some of the specifics, but there's a link here for a tutorial for a magnifier on Windows. And so if you'd like to learn more, that has much more information than I have even included in the slides. Windows Plus and Windows Minus will make it bigger, smaller. If I needed to exit, I used Windows Escape. And then I can also use Windows U to get to the ease of access settings. So we have some many different keyboard commands or different ways to use the mouse, or even a touch screen for all of these different options. Screen magnification for Chrome OS. And I'm going to share with you, I've been working recently with Google and ACVREP to develop a training for Chromebook accessibility, and it's set to release hopefully any day. I'm hoping within the next week or two. So Laura, I could share that information with you when that course is available. It will be free for at least the first year from ACVREP, and it will result in a digital badge for Chromebook accessibility. So
that sounds great. Thank you.
I could let you know when that's available. I have a link to the news page in here, but I don't have the link to share with you yet for how to register, because the courses, we're still finalizing getting the digital badge ready. So zooming in on your magnifier in a Chromebook, again, you also want to consider zooming within and out within not just the screen magnifier, but within the browser itself. Because sometimes if someone's working within a browser, they may need to just zoom in or out within a browser. So either a pinch to zoom where they can do that within a specific application, or using Control or minus within the Chrome browser. And really that will work on most even Windows browsers, including Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and even Internet Explorer. So Control with plus or minus just zooms in or out. It won't make the toolbar bigger, but it will zoom in or out. With Chromebook, another thing that you could do, it's not really an accessibility feature, but you could use it as, you know, as that if it's helpful, is to change the resolution. So that's Control Shift with plus or minus. I don't expect anyone to memorize those. They're in here, but we can also change the resolution. So, you know, just keep in mind that literally is changing the size of everything, and sometimes that could affect what displays and what doesn't display on different pages. So instructions are also provided for the screen magnifier. So Control Alt with brightness up and brightness down, right? That will increase or decrease on a Chromebook. So we can make it bigger and smaller. And I also could do it with a command using the touchpad and a keyboard command, or I could use the touchscreen. So we have some flexibility in how we adjust and what works best. Zoom on a Mac, there's a link. So if you'd like to learn some of those keyboard shortcuts, there's a link for that. It would be Option and Command with plus or minus. So there's typically, you know, kind of a formula. In most cases, plus or minus are used in some way to make it bigger or smaller. So Option and Command with plus or minus would zoom in or out when the screen magnifier is turned on the Mac. And then we could turn it on and off with Option Command 8. Color inversion is available. And there's other features available on a Mac too. So you could go into some of the other accessibility features to adjust the size of the mouse, if that's helpful. So screen reading software for Windows. I'm going to go ahead and just pull all these up because there's a number of options. We have JAWS, which stands for Job Access with Speech. I mentioned Fusion, which is a combination of Zoom Text and JAWS. NVDA is free, and that stands for Non-Visual Desktop Access. NVDA is, I believe, I have to check, but I believe this is one of the most popular screen readers in the world now. It is free, and it really is an excellent screen reader as well. So I definitely recommend looking into it. There are some customizations and add-ons that you could install, kind of like JAWS scripts, but it just works a little bit differently. They're called add-ons. And then System Access is from Numa Solutions, which is formerly Ceratech. So that's another third-party option. And then we have the Dolphin screen reader. So that's from Dolphin, which is in the UK. And that's a third-party screen reader from Dolphin. And again, Supernova magnifier and screen reader combines both the full screen reader and the full screen magnifier into one single package. It does work a little bit different than Fusion in that when you have Fusion, you're running the Fusion interface and then JAWS. So really Fusion is kind of the Zoom Text. The Zoom Text interface is what it looks like. And then you're running JAWS side by side. So when you start it, they're running together, but you are running both applications at the same time. When you run the Dolphin screen reader, it's all built into one single interface. So that is one difference in how they function. And then Narrator on Windows 10 has really, they've made some impressive changes in the past. You know, when I first started in this field, I would have told you that Narrator is really just a kind of break your glass in case of an emergency and you can't turn your computer off because your screen reader crashed and you need to do something. You know, turn Narrator on, turn the computer off, turn it back on. Now, Narrator really is quite functional. You can navigate with it even on the web, and it works really well. They're adding new features, and it's definitely worth looking into. So there's a link here for the complete guide to Narrator on Windows 10. You know, Microsoft with Windows, Google with Chromebooks, and Apple with Mac OS. I mean, they keep adding, and also the mobile devices, but they keep adding more and more features that are, you know, just adding to the accessibility. And sometimes it's not necessarily in the accessibility settings. It may be in, like I said, other settings for keyboard adjustments or mouse adjustments. So I would really, with each update, I would highly recommend exploring the different features that are new in each of those updates when you update any of those operating systems. With screen readers, so customization may be needed. Not all programs are accessible out of the box with screen readers. And it may be possible to customize a solution. So it really will vary on what the issue is and what the, you know, is it that we need to just find some other keyboard commands or some shortcuts that will be a workaround, or does something need full scripting or customization in order to work with a screen reader? And sometimes there may not be a solution because something is just completely incompatible. So it could also include just creating special hotkeys, keyboard shortcuts. And options are also available, but you do want to make sure that you're working with someone qualified and knowledgeable with programming and scripting. So there's links here for scripting for NVDA and scripting for JAWS, but highly recommend that you consult with someone who is experienced in those areas if that's a need. This is really important in work environments, but it could also apply to school environments or other settings as well. So narrator keyboard commands, we're going to go through this pretty quick here. Control with Windows and Enter will turn narrator on and off. So that works in Windows 10. The keyboard command in the past was a little bit different to turn it on. So they've recently changed it, but now it's just one single command to remember to turn it on or off. And then caps lock with Escape will exit narrator. That's a backup. However, you could still do Control Windows and Enter to turn it on or off. And you could also, once you start it, you could get to the quick start guide if you want to learn more about it. And I definitely recommend going through that tutorial with any of the screen readers to just get familiar, especially if someone's new to it, and then making sure also that training is set up for a new user. Control with Windows and the letter N, that's the shortcut to get to the narrator settings. So operating system software for other systems, VoiceOver for Apple products. So it's free, built in, works great. You could use Refreshable Braille pretty much with any of the screen readers I'm mentioning. TalkBack for Android, so that's also free and built in, so no additional cost or need to add on other third-party screen readers. It's built right in. Orca would be a screen reader for GNOME or Linux distros. So with some Linux distros, you may find that there's a screen reader built in. I'm not going to go deep into Linux, but sometimes there's screen reader built in, and at other times you may need to install Orca separately. And Chromebox would be the screen reader that's built in and free for Chromebooks. And also Chrome OS, sometimes you'll have the Chrome OS operating system in like a Chromebox or some other form factor, but often we see the Chromebooks that are in the laptop form. So the link here is for Google and ACVRP, the link for the news article. And I'll update Laura as soon as the course is available. So hopefully she could share that with you, and that course will be free. It's 8 modules, and there's a quiz for each module. And once you pass those in the final exam, you earn the Chromebook Accessibility Expert Certificate digital badge. There's a list of modifier keys. So for when you're working with an operating system, it's very important to understand which keys you hold down when you're doing a command. So the easiest way to think about this is when you type a capital letter, you hold down Shift. So that's because it's a modifier key. So if I tried to, if I was typing a capital R and I hit R first and then Shift, I would get a lowercase r and then nothing. So you just want to make sure when you're typing using modifier keys in a keyboard command, you hold those down. So the modifier keys on a Mac OS computer are Shift, Command, Control, Option, the function key, that FN key, and then caps lock may also be set to a modifier key if you adjust it as the VoiceOver key. Sometimes that's used as a special modifier key. I have a link here for VoiceOver Basics if you want to learn some VoiceOver commands. I'm going to skip over some of these commands, but they are on there in slide 45 and 46 if you want to get a little bit more into some of the Mac commands. There's a link on 47 for a list of commands and gestures for using Mac OS computer with VoiceOver. It's a link to the Appendix A, commands and gestures for VoiceOver. And Chromebook modifier keys, so they're very similar, but we have some variations. So on Chromebooks, we have Shift and Control and Alt. But then instead of a caps lock key, we have usually either search or launcher. And that, if you're using the Chromebox screen reader, would be your Chromebox key. So that's also used as a modifier key. If you're using a Windows keyboard with a Chromebook, then the Windows key would be the same as the search or launcher key. So I have to start or exit Chromebox is Control-Alt-Z. I'm going to skip over some of this just to, let's see. So One thing I want to point out is just with Google Workspace, so this is formerly G Suite. When you're using Google Workspace, so Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides, when you're using those applications, they are fully accessible with a screen reader on a Windows computer or other operating system. You do need to make sure that if you're not on a Chromebook, that you adjust the settings. That's beyond the scope of what we're doing today, but it is important, and Google has made some excellent changes to ensure compatibility with other screen readers, and they also have full keyboard support. So there is more to that, and they have some great support pages if you want to learn more about that. There's just an image here of the Chrome desktop showing the launcher on the left, the desktop, which is just a blank, pretty unreal looking sky. It has just different colors, clouds, stars. And on the bottom, the taskbar, it shows the launcher, which is a circle on the left, the shelf, which has icons to some programs that I would want to quickly access. And over on the right is the system tray that has things like battery status, accessibility, the time, and so forth. I mentioned Orca, so that's a free screen reader for Linux distros. If anyone has a need to work with accessibility on Linux, you may want to take a look at that link for Orca to learn more. One important thing when you're using a screen reader is to take control. So with most screen readers and speech features of screen magnification programs, the control is typically the hush key. With almost all of the options I mentioned, CDesk would be actually the only option I could think of that is an exception to that. It's escape is the hush key with that. But with all of the other screen readers and options, the speech control will be used to temper. It doesn't turn off the speech, it just temporarily stops it from talking. So iOS accessibility, we have VoiceOver, which is the free built-in screen reader. We have Zoom, which is the built-in screen magnifier. And we also have a feature that's called Magnifier, which I know could be confusing when we're thinking of screen magnifier. But the magnifier accessibility feature it basically works as an electronic video magnifier. And it's built into iOS and iPadOS. So if you have an iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad of any model that has a modern version of the operating system, you have that built-in feature for that magnifier. And there's many other accessibility features. Android accessibility, we have TalkBack would be the screen reader, unless you're using, like I said, Fire OS, which is it's called Voice View, or sometimes with some of the other versions, it's called something different. But TalkBack is the typical unmodified version of the screen reader. And then there's magnifier gestures and features built in. You also have a number of other accessibility features. And again, accessible apps is really what makes these devices pretty amazing, because the flexibility and options are endless. I just have an example here on slide 55. If you wanted to go through an exercise of turning VoiceOver on with Siri, we would simply just say turn VoiceOver on. And then just some exercises if you wanted to explore that. Triple click accessibility shortcut, that's something that's available for iOS or iPadOS. And if you don't have a home button, you still could use this. It would use your side button instead. So there's an option in accessibility settings to enable the triple click accessibility. And you could use it for VoiceOver or a number of the other accessibility features on the device. And if you have more than one option set, then you would just need to select which one you wanted to use. Laura, we're at 1 o'clock, right? I want to make sure we have time for questions.
Yeah, we've got about 13 minutes left.
Okay, I'm gonna, if it's okay with you, Laura, I'm gonna go ahead and skip past some of the operating system specifics and get more to just the last portion. So I want to make sure we touch on that.
That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit before we wrap up is remote training and support. So there's a number of options for remote training and support. Some are fully accessible even for an instructor who, who needs to use a screen reader or screen magnifier software. So I have some of those listed, like Remote Incident Manager, JAWS Tandem, NVDA Remote, Chrome Remote Desktop. And there's other options that could be used by an instructor to connect to other devices that are using AT software. So Quick Assist, which is built right into Windows 10, Log Me and Rescue, which is something you would have to purchase, TeamViewer is also third party. And then also just simple screen sharing sometimes will work within Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or Google Meet. I shared on slide 64, there's three trainings that I've done in the past, this past year, that are focused on remote training and some different tips. On the first one from the AFB Virtual Leadership Conference, that one focuses more on the high-tech options and the remote control features and specific software like Remote Incident Manager and Log Me and Rescue. The other one that I did with FIMCBI, that one was focusing more on the video conferencing tools and how you could use those for different types of remote instruction or support services. And then there's also, they included a portion of my AFB in the Students with Additional Needs Remote Environments, which was an unconference by Benetech, CAST, and Bridge Multimedia, and some other partners. And that has a short clip of my AFB presentation, but it has a number of other resources and video webinars that I thought would be helpful for you. So if you wanted to learn more, I would highly recommend you explore those. Whether you're providing face-to-face or remote services, it's important to just remember most tools need to be installed and set up. Participants and service providers must first learn the tools. So working with instructors and their students to help them connect during lessons, that's something that's been really important during the pandemic. Some options are accessed through a web browser, so cloud-based. And some options are easier to use than others. So it's important to kind of consider, we have a lot of different options for remote training. So you want to make sure you're picking the one that's going to be best for you and your student. And it may not be the same for each situation. And some are more accessible than others. And that's really important both for you and your students or clients. It's often necessary to open ports on a router. So with some of the more high-tech options that are the remote control applications, sometimes ports need to be open within office settings where they may be restricted. Technology setup is really critical. So I just wanted to touch on this. You can provide the best assessment and the best training, but if the device is not set up properly, your student may not be able to benefit from it. So you definitely want to make sure that you're looking at the configuration and setup, and that includes the physical space as well. And this is the same for remote training or face-to-face training. So also looking at adjustments for compatibility. If you're working on any computer, if you have any other professionals, you do want to make sure that your participant backs up their information. Anything can happen. If it crashes, you just want to make sure that data is backed up either to a cloud or a local storage drive. You want to make sure you're adjusting settings according to preferences for the AT software. Just looking at keyboard settings, repeat rate and delay, that could really make a big difference for a lot of people in how their comfort for typing. Power options is another important setting to look at. Display and personalization, built-in accessibility features. Sometimes the function key, if your action key is at the top or adjusting volume, for a lot of people using screen readers or other AT software, they want those to work as function keys so they can perform keyboard commands. So you may need to adjust that setting. Also looking at the tap to click settings for the touchpad. That could be a problem if someone's typing and their thumbs or fingers are constantly touching on the touchpad. I have a list of resources here for additional information, and includes Access World, which is an online magazine from AFB, applevis.com. You could get some tips or ideas about accessible apps or anything related to Apple accessibility. Hadley School, Perkins eLearning, Vision Aware, JVIB, which is the Journal of Visual Impairment and Blindness, and ATIA's journal, which is Assistive Technology Outcomes and Benefits, ATOB, which is a free online journal. And then just one last thing that is important to remember is tech support. Don't feel like you have to be out there alone. And this goes for you and your students or clients, make sure you have these resources available. On slide 69, I have different resources for free accessibility support for Microsoft, Apple, Google, Freedom Scientific and Vispero, Humanware. And if you're working with other manufacturers, reach out to them to make sure that you have that information handy. Some of these you could contact by phone, chat. There's even options through Be My Eyes or Ira, which are human support applications where you're talking with a human and they can actually see what you're doing through your mobile device. So those are available for a few of these tech support resources. So hopefully that provided a good overview for you. And I did skip over some of the more technical slides that go into keyboard commands. So if you do want to explore that, I definitely recommend taking a look at the slide presentation. With that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Great, thank you very, very much. So does anyone have any questions that they would like to bring up or just takeaways that you'd like to share? Please feel free to use the chat. You can also raise your hand if you would rather unmute and share verbally with us. I'm seeing a few excellents and thank yous in our chat, Rachel, so this is great.
Thank you so much.
So, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I'm glad to hear that this was helpful.
We've got one new message. Yep, we've got another thank you in the chat. So I just wanted to say thank you myself, both to Rachel. Great, thorough, excellent information that I think everyone will be able to keep as a resource and use moving forward. And then thank you to everyone attending. I know that at this point in the world, we're all getting a little bit tired of Zoom and we're getting tired of webinars, but what a fantastic way to be able to bring in trainers from all over the country. I'm sure Rachel would have been happy to fly to Wisconsin and give us this presentation in person. But then she wouldn't have been able to hear her little dog in the background barking while she gave the talk. So that's perfect. So just a reminder that you will get a survey, and part of that survey will have a section with some short questions that you'll need to answer so that you can get your CRCs and CEUs. I try to get those out within a month after the event, so you'll can get those in July. And then mark your calendars. Our next training for WisTech will be on August 10th, again from 10 a.m. until noon. And the topic for August is digital access for those with learning and cognition. And we've got two excellent trainers from the state of Minnesota who head up the IT and accessibility for the state of Minnesota. So I will have a link for that, registering for that in the email that comes out with the survey. And then in the meantime, feel free to reach out to Rachel if you have questions about her content. You will get a copy of the PowerPoint or connect with me and let me know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, everyone have a great day. We appreciate your time and have a great week.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Laura.